think. Where is Rowan?
He doesn't look like he's joined just yet, Terry. That's I can't see him. It's not a good start, is it?
Okay, particularly because I think Phil's just taken the opportunity to... Phil, are you there? Sorry about this. Yep. Rowan may be having problems with his connection, so I'm afraid we're just going to have to wait for Phil to come back.
Let's have Simon Hanna come in and present the what we stand for. That'd be good.
No, little one, no.
I think you need to unmute him, Simon.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Simon. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to speak this early, so I'm only wearing a T-shirt. So I was going to put on a more formal shirt for the second session. Just to say welcome to the first conference of anti-capitalist resistance. We're a new organisation. We're made up of a number of different comrades from different traditions. And we've come together in the spirit of unity because I think we're all very aware of, you know, the very serious threats facing us at the moment, from runaway climate change to the growth of fascism and the populist right, and the continuing neoliberal austerity agenda of various governments across the world, which is attacking the working class, and the struggles of the oppressed, which in some countries, as we've seen with Poland around the abortion laws, is actually going backwards. So we want to try and raise ourselves to the tasks facing the socialist left. And we recognize that, you know, being in kind of very small groups, sort of ploughing your own furrow, is not going to be good enough for the coming battles. And we need to try and overcome some of the fracturing on the left. That's not to say there aren't political differences and, you know, there's disagreements and so on, but we want to try and focus on what we can agree on and what we can unite around in a spirit of plurality, to try and build healthy socialist politics, both across this country, as also helping obviously internationally as well. So this is only the first kind of conference of the ACR. If you haven't joined yet, I'd encourage you to do so. We want to try and create a very positive, welcoming environment for socialists. We want to, you know, develop some really good theory, some really good analysis around things. And, you know, as soon as the pandemic is over, obviously we need to, you know, really get out there and be building very positive campaigns around both defensive struggles and trying to, you know, fight for improvements, trying to actually fight to tackle some of the more fundamental issues facing us at the moment. So yeah, I'll kind of finish there, and hopefully we can have a great founding conference and we can go forward in a spirit of unity and collective strength.
Thanks very much, Simon, especially seeing as you had to do that at short notice. So we will now move on to the main business of this morning, which is the discussion on the world crisis and the international revolutionary left. We have three speakers this morning who I will introduce each just before they speak, but we will hear from Phil Hearse, from Cristina Carvalhaes, and from Gilbert Achcar. So Phil is a veteran socialist activist, my notes tell me. Not sure I would have used the word veteran, long-standing, I think. He's one of the authors of Creeping Fascism. His articles appear on the Socialist Resistance, International Viewpoint and Mutiny websites, and he's a supporter of anti-capitalist resistance. Over to you, Phil.
Hello, and hello everybody. I think if we were having this discussion 5 or 6 years ago, if you think back what the discussion might have been like, we'd have certainly been discussing austerity. We would have been discussing the climate crisis. We would have been discussing imperialist war, the dreadful aftermath of the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, the dreadful situation in Syria. We'd be talking about political polarization and the growth of the far right. And we'd be talking about probably the aftermath of the Arab Spring and the difficulties in the socialist left. But today, all those things which were kind of common on the left 5 or 6 years ago have recombined in a new and dramatic way into a multi-dimensional crisis in which the key elements interact and have created the biggest crisis in the history of capitalism for certain, or at least since the Second World War, and a real threat to the future of human civilization. And obviously, the two key elements of that, or the three key elements of that, the economic crisis, of course, we always knew that the way they overcame the 2007-2008 crisis by creating a vast pyramid of debt would blow up at some point, but we didn't know how. The climate crisis, the pandemic, which has demonstrated the inequalities and crisis of capitalism in a completely dramatic way. And of course, we've had the experience of the Trump government in the intervening period, which has confirmed the Trump government and its aftermath, in my view, have confirmed what we've said in creeping fascism. We've had a political polarization which has been mainly to the right, but with important elements of fight back from the left, which are referred to. But the one thing which has clearly emerged is that about 8 months ago, Greta Thunberg said, while the pandemic is going on, we shouldn't forget the climate crisis. But successive analysis have demonstrated that the climate crisis and the pandemic are not two separate things. On the contrary, the source of this pandemic, probably, and the source of previous pandemics and the source of future pandemics to come has been industrial agriculture and the destruction of the barriers to forest pathogens which have been unleashed into human populations, and the task of preventing future pandemics is the same thing as the fight for the environment. And at the same time, of course, there have been all kinds of tipping points achieved. And humanity has a very short period of time to prevent a catastrophic slide in global warming. Having said all that, there are important elements of fight back internationally, some of which Simon referred to and I'll come on to in a moment. This crisis is creating a huge social and economic crisis. If they don't suppress the virus, and it looks like neoliberal capitalism will be incapable of suppressing this virus, that putting all their money on vaccines is not going to work, then far greater economic collapse can be expected. And even in this country, they're going to stop shelling out vast amounts of money. They're incapable of doing so. Benefits will be cut. There'll be a massive homeless crisis in the advanced capitalist countries, and already there's a massive crisis in the global south with this pandemic, and the dispute over the vaccine demonstrates that the health systems in the global south have collapsed. The pandemic is now going to sweep through the global south, and as it sweeps through the global south, it will come back to the global north. The inability and the unwillingness of the world capitalism, of the imperialist bourgeoisie, to take measures to aid the people of the global south is creating a further pandemic and eventually economic disaster. The pandemic has demonstrated and illustrated all kinds of divisions and poverty in the global north. We can see that very clearly in Britain itself, that the people who are suffering from this pandemic, the people who are suffering the majority of deaths in this pandemic, are the poor. People whose jobs don't keep them at home and they have to go out to work in unsafe workplaces, but it's also especially impacted on women who have borne the brunt of this crisis because they're the main homemakers and because they're the main caregivers. At the local food banks, you can see large numbers of women internationally have left the workforce in a disproportionate numbers during the pandemic because they have to look after their children, to look after older relatives, to be the caregivers and the family organizers. But the polarization has not just been to the right. But let me say, our view, I think the view of most people in the anti-capitalist resistance, is that although Trump has been defeated, some people responded to that, not in anti-capitalist resistance, but in other left organizations, by saying, you see how stupid the creeping fascism idea was. The events since Trump's defeat on November the 3rd, especially the coup, the semi-coup, fascist coup attempt on January the 6th, has demonstrated that the idea of a continuing push by the extreme right and by fascism was not wrong. And yes, 74 million people voted for Trump, an extraordinary number, and they will continue to organize in the United States and internationally. In the next period, in the elections coming next year in France, the year after in Italy, there is a strong likelihood, for example, that Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National will come to power in France, or at least win the presidency. There's a strong likelihood that Salvini will win the presidency or become the prime minister, in Italy, a strong possibility. This creeping fascism, this polarization to the right, is a major thing that we have to fight. But on a global scale, there have been extraordinary fightbacks over the last year. The first one to mention, of course, is Black Lives Matter, which has a gigantic international impact, including in this country. In my view, rebounded into the election campaign, mobilizing the Black community to defeat Trump. And although as an organization, Black Lives Matter may seem to have gone away, the consciousness of that will recur. But in addition to that, we've seen an extraordinary resurgence of struggle, despite very difficult situations, and a terrible impact of the pandemic amongst people in Latin America, in Bolivia, in Chile, in Argentina, in Ecuador, and other countries, and even the beginnings of a new fight back in Brazil. And I would say that in these struggles and in the struggles going on today simultaneously in Tunisia and in Lebanon, you don't necessarily get it on all the news bulletins in Britain, occasionally on Channel 4 News. You have to look further afield for the information. But these fightbacks, this is maybe, Gilbert will say something about this, but the second wave, or the beginnings of a second wave of the Arab Spring. And then there have been the fightbacks of women on the abortion struggles in particular, a very defensive struggle in Poland, but a victorious struggle eventually in Argentina. In all these struggles, you see one thing, and that is the role of young people. To be honest, large numbers of us are not going to be leading the giant mass struggles in the world in the next period. It's going to be young people, and it's going to be women. For example, even in Lebanon, in the Middle East, you see a fantastic, extraordinary mobilization of women, young women in these struggles. And this raises, the prospect, the beginnings of, in my opinion, a new wave of feminism. But the new wave of feminism is not these micro business projects in India and all this kind of stuff. The new wave of feminism is young women leading these struggles internationally. But there's a key political kind of theme in all these struggles. They're not just struggles on women's rights, on abortion, or against austerity, but they are struggles for democracy. The political theme of democracy is rising everywhere around the world, from Hong Kong, Poland, Latin America, and we have to be able to integrate that into our politics, because democracy is under threat in this country. Yesterday, people will have seen the appeal court found that these 16 people who were arrested at Stansted Airport, stopping the deportation of so-called illegal immigrants, were wrongly convicted of a terrorism offence. Thank goodness. But the fact that they were charged with a terrorism thing shows the urge, the wish, the attempt by the bourgeoisie internationally to delegitimize and repress struggles, including through legal mechanisms. And some people have called this process the beginnings of a global police state. And it was clear after the Arab Spring, after the Occupy movement in 2007, 2008, the person you saw most often on your television screen and the news at night was the riot policeman. And this, everywhere where protest breaks out, you have the mobilization of riot police, of the army, to try to repress it. The struggle for democracy is a key part of our struggle for a socialist alternative. You have an amazing situation in the United States, in my opinion, where you had simultaneously, you've had 74, 75 million people vote for Donald Trump, but in opinion polls, over the past year, 2 years, 3 years, the number of young people, the number of people in the population as a whole who say that they are more inclined to support socialism than to support capitalism. This is, in some cases, 40%, sometimes 50% or more in these opinion polls. And this represents something really important, the decreasing credibility of this system, the decreasing credibility of this system, and the search for alternatives. But at the same time, unfortunately, we've seen that it's incredibly difficult to build and maintain broad left alternatives which can give a political leadership to the ongoing struggles. And we've seen that, well, and we've seen also, I would say, put it like this, everywhere where a broad left alternatives emerge, which look like they could possibly come to power, possibly provide a governmental alternative, they come under incredible attack from the bourgeoisie. The key example, of course, is what happened to the Corbyn project in Great Britain and the way that that was repressed, but also in a different way, the fantastic mobilization of the elite in the American Democratic Party to defeat Bernie Sanders in two successive presidential election primary campaigns to prevent him from becoming the Democratic candidate, which would be symbolic of the 15. Well, I'll just finish off here, Terry, which would be symbolic of the emergence of the Democratic Socialists of America. There's no easy formula about how to build a mass alternative to neoliberal capitalism, to creeping fascism, and to the impending catastrophe. Because unless we can make substantial advances on climate change, unless we can throw back the pandemics, humanity faces a giant crisis of human civilization. And we face, in the next period, renewed challenges from the far right. And it means that we have to build left alternatives, of course. But the one thing that the past period has shown is that alternatives which do not have a revolutionary core inspired by Marxism can easily be derailed, and that is the task we have before us in the next period. Okay, Terry, that's it.
Thanks very much, Phil. That's very useful and thought-provoking. I'm very happy to introduce our second speaker today. Cristina Carvalhaes is a journalist and a leader of Insurgencia, a current in the Brazilian PSOL, the Party for Socialism and Freedom. Welcome, Cristina.
Thank you. Good morning. I beg your pardon for my English. We are a very special kind of Latin Americans because we Brazilians don't speak well even the Spanish, and I beg your pardon. I will try to bring here some appointments, some highlights of our draft of a document of international analysis, international situation analysis that the Fourth International Bureau have been preparing for the next international committee next month in February. I think it coincides, it's very similar and complementary to the Phil's comprehension about the complex situation in the world. First of all, everything economical, social, political, everything in the last year have been over determined by the pandemic crisis. Just like Phil commented, this crisis, in our opinion, as we observed in June, had opened a moment of convergence of 3 or 4 long-term phenomena, long-term crises that have been developing in a way relatively autonomous and that are converging now in an explosive way. The ecological crisis, the economic crisis of the capitalism system, the crisis of legitimacy of all the institutions of global governance, whether in the North and in the South, and a geopolitical struggle between the hegemonical US imperialism and new agents, new state agents in the world, just like China and Russia. We think this process are changing substantially, are altering the world that we have been living since the 90s, the situation opened in the 90s of the last century, when the East European bloc and the Soviet Union had her capitalist restoration. We think we live a moment of bifurcation in the path of the history, and it's a major challenge for us and for all the political actors, including the bourgeois actors. In addition to the climate crisis, almost a collapse of the Earth system, we think we are living in very important technological transformations that are threatening the humanity. We are talking about the military technology with a new generation of tactical nuclear weapons and drones and all the gadgets that that make to grow the capacity to decide, to the powers to decide when and whom to kill. The second technological area is the genetic engineering through the manipulation, appropriation of life, privatization of seeds. That's a part of a global cultural war against peasant life and human food. And third, the appearance of the surveillance capitalism, such as those we have in China with the social credit system. The use of the surveillance systems has been accelerated by the pandemic. Another highlight I would like to remark is the hegemonic transition, or hegemonical crisis, we can say. We are in an increasingly militarized world. The competition between the United States and China is global, and especially in the economic field, and China is recognized as a rising superpower. We think these transformations couldn't develop without very serious conflicts. The threat of a nuclear conflict is reappearing in the world horizon. The third highlight is something that we are talking about as a rising of the neo-fascisms, or rising of a new right. We analyze that there is a major division of political projects in the global bourgeoisie. As a result of the global crisis, an important part of the global bourgeoisie had adopted a fascist project, to impose the economic necessities of the system. and we had. I think we need to make deeper this discussion, because it's not only fascism growth; it's a important change in the political paradigm for the bourgeoisie. In this scenario, we think it's a debate, of course, that despite all the factors, the Trump's defeat in the United States was a major setback for the ultra-right project. Of course, it doesn't change the balance of forces in the world, but we are convinced that it was very, very important. I don't know if you can imagine this importance for Latin America and for Brazil in particular. We here are very, very glad with the Bolsonaro's isolation in the global scenario. I want to speak about the details on the analysis of the situation opened by the pandemic, but I would like to touch one element more, that is the resistance and the growth of the struggles. It's important.
5 minutes more, Anna Cristina.
Okay, I'm finished. The resistance did not stop and are growing. 2019 was a year of great mobilizations, democratic and anti-neoliberal in 32 countries. There was a lot of democratic and anti-neoliberal riots all around the world, all around the 5 continents. Our hypothesis is that resistance to this intolerable, to this situation, terrible situation, social, economic, and political situation, tends to increase the social conflict. This doesn't mean that we locate a change in the balance of forces between the bourgeoisie and the social movements. It's not true yet, but it's evident that it's clear that we had, even under the pandemic, a lot of struggles. Women, youth for climate changes, against the climate changes, and a lot of other sectors. Of course, this increasing in the struggles with some victories, but always partial victories, have a great contradiction, because more the struggles, more the resistance, more it appears more clear the absence of an alternative, a broad alternative of the exploited and not oppressed people. In this situation, we must redouble our efforts to take initiatives aimed to converge the struggles, to convergence of struggles, to encourage the self-organizations from the bottom, to struggle for the international solidarity and organization to be stronger. It's a very difficult issue in our days. We are talking with 12 or 15 organizations of socialists in PSOL are talking with 12 or 50 parties and organizations in Latin America, for example. But it's very complicated to build some internationalist initiatives. And I will finish remarking that to rebuild this anti-systemic left that was defeated in the last experiences, just like Syriza, just like Podemos, just like Corbyn and Sanders, is insisting in participate in make part of the resistance struggles and fighting to the convergence of the struggles. Only in this territory, only in this scenario, you can rebuild a systemic left. And we think it's better than we are contradictory, no? Better than we are 5 or 10 years ago. I think it's all.
Thank you so much, Anna Cristina. Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce our final speaker, and not because he's our final speaker. So Gilbert Achcar is a Lebanese socialist, a professor at the School of African and Oriental Studies, and the author of many books, including The Clash of Barbarisms, The Arabs and Holocaust, and Morbid Symptoms, Relapse in the Arab Uprising. Gilbert, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, glad to be here with you in this meeting, you all. Right. Okay. So, I mean, of course, I'll be speaking in the same framework, let's say, that the previous two speakers. I think we have a broad agreement on many issues, but let me try to bring in some way different light. I would start by saying that we are facing two pandemics, one of which is much more research than the other. That is, you have a lot, very intensive research going on about the causes of the COVID pandemic, connection to climate crisis and the rest. But there is another pandemic, which is, in my view, more worrying, and probably in the view of everyone here, which is the far-right pandemic. We have been we have been seeing an ongoing far-right pandemic now for several years globally. And it culminated in some way with the election of Donald Trump. Without prompting the necessary research about the causes, the deep causes, except for the very local, every time very local causes are sought instead of looking to the broader picture. And indeed, this is a far-right pandemic when you think of all the progresses made by the far right, including fascist-like organization or neo-fascist organizations and movement. And that is really global, and hence the term pandemic is very much justified. Think of, yes, we've been speaking about Bolsonaro. Think of Modi in India. That's very much a neo-fascist government. Think of course, we have Trump in the United States. We have Duterte in Philippines. We have, including not fully neo-fascist, but very much hard-right governments in Russia, for instance, with Putin, Egypt, other countries. So it's really a global phenomenon. And of course, Europe, we are all familiar with Europe, with the shock that Salvini represented for a country like Italy, when you think of of what the kind of balance of forces you had in that country a few decades, very few decades ago. That's very much striking. And yes, it has been mentioned. Phil mentioned that the threat represented by the fascist Le Pen movement in France, Sweden. I mean, of all countries, where that's the kind of country where we wouldn't have even imagined that you could have something like a fascist movement, and yet you have one of the strongest far-right fascist movement in Europe today. So, and you know, you can continue, the list is long, not to mention Eastern Europe, where the governments like Orban, of course, fits very much into this far-right pandemic picture. So we are really facing a pandemic, a political pandemic. And indeed, there are, of course, one historical precedent, at least. There is one historical precedent, which is the interwar years of the previous century, when in the 20s and 30s, you had this global rise of fascism, which was, yes, global, but more into the global north than the global south, whereas this one is more global in the full sense. We're really in the age of globalization in every respect, and also in this respect. And I think that the deep reason of this is actually connected to the deep reason of the previous one, after the last century. It is related to the kind of crisis of capitalism into which we are. And essentially for our time, the neoliberal changes that started being implemented massively in the 1980s. So we've had already 4 decades of neoliberalism. That with their dismantlement of social safety nets, with their precarization of life, and all that, have created the ground for identity-based movement, which many of which are far-right movement, which become movements rejecting anyone not belonging to their identity. And in conjunction with neoliberalism, we've had the collapse of the Soviet Union and the massive discredit to the idea of socialism that this represented. None of us here, I presume, regarded the Soviet Union as a model of socialism, but beyond that, our circles, the vast majority of humanity were used to believe that that is the model of socialism, and even of Marxist socialism or communism or whatever. So the conjunction of all this is what led and facilitated this far-right pandemic that disrupted whatever kind of immunity there existed before, and created a ground for the very fast spread of this. Which was, of course, boosted in the last few years by the Great Recession of 2008, which is a turning point. You can see how it accelerated the far-right, the growth of the far-right globally. And in the case of Europe, we can add, because we are located in Europe and it's very important, the massive wave of refugees from the Syrian conflict in 2015 was a key argument, a key issue seized upon by fascist movements in Europe, all kind of racist movement in Europe, Islamophobic movement, and the rest in their growth. So this is the picture. Now, we are in the midst of a right pandemic, but indeed there are counter elements emerging, and I think we can say that there has been also, on the other hand, a new wave of youth radicalization happening globally, which is quite different again from that of the 60s and the 68 and all that. very different ideologically and politically, because it doesn't have the same references. And in the meantime, you have had the collapse of the Soviet Union. Don't forget this, and that's very important. And the shift of China to becoming a capitalist. To resorting to massively capitalist economic model. So, but we have seen there has been, and I would say that the Arab Spring, as it was called in 2011. Which was labeled at the time as a youth. All uprisings, and indeed, there are no uprisings done by people over 60. And there are usually always young people who do the uprisings in history. Uprisings are essentially, when you look at the vast majority of the participants, young people. And we've had, the Arab Spring was at a regional level, at the whole region, you had a real radicalization against the government. And then that was inspiring for other countries like Spain, like Greece, like even the United States. The Occupy movement, as we know, was inspired by what happened in Egypt at that point. And this radicalization took also the form of the Corbyn and Sanders phenomena in the UK and the United States. When you think of it, in 2016, the major surprise, if you look at the United States, was not Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was just the continuity of something that started with the conservative revolution of Ronald Reagan, a sharp shift to the right of the Republicans in the United States, and that went through the George W. Bush administration, which was in its time the furthest to the right ever in U.S. history. You had the Tea Party against Obama, a very racist movement rising. And then Trump was the outcome of all that. The ground was prepared for the Trump phenomenon to come. So the real surprise 2016 was not Trump, it was Sanders. That was, that was harder to imagine for any of us, I would say, that we would see such a movement, such millions of young people, mostly young people, supporting a candidate calling himself socialist in a country like the United States. That's absolutely amazing. And of course, the Corbyn phenomenon, even here, even though that this is not the United States, but that was also a massive, massive surprise. I don't think anyone can say I had predicted or I was expecting this to happen. That was a surprise to everybody, including Corbyn himself, I'm sure. And this has continued. 2019, we have had a second wave of the Arab Spring, as it was called. You had 4 countries where you had uprisings on top of the 6 of 2011, not to mention all other countries where you had sharp rises of social movements. You've had movements in Chile, in Hong Kong, in Thailand, in France, the Gilets jaunes in France. You have had a real global wave of radicalization. And here again, mostly young people. And this culminates also a few months ago, last year, with the Black Lives Matter. According to an investigation by the New York Times, this is the largest movement ever in US history. And the estimates is between 15 and 26 million people were on the streets. So that's absolutely massive. So we have to take all these issues into account. They are very, very important. But I would say that, yes, indeed, the problem, the key issue that all this is facing is that there is a lack of model. There is a lack of political and even one could say theoretical, if you want, in the sense of revolutionary theory, clarity. including, so, I mean, this points to the need to aggiornamento, renewal of political theory, of revolutionary ideology, and of the organizational models. That's very important. I think here in this country, Left Unity tried to invent an organizational model, which in my view was I mean, a very good step forward. And that points to the kind of reconsideration and reimagination of organization, of the language of politics and all that. This is absolutely important because the new generation is allergic to the past forms of organizations, and I would say for very good reason. Yeah, they are allergic to the caudillism, the authoritarian, the so-called democratic centralism, which is very bureaucratic, etc., etc. There is a very, and even the term party is not that attractive. It's even repulsive, actually, for many young people. The fact that in the UK and the US, the radicalization, paradoxically, a youth radicalization seeks two old guys as symbols in the persons of Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. This is very much striking, but the fact is that they look to these guys as honest figures, you know, and given the fact that they are quite old, not the source of some kind of authoritarian project. So we have really to think of that. We have, I mean, the term that has been very much seen in the media over the last few years, since the Arab Spring, actually in 2011, is leaderless, and the formula leaderless movements. And indeed, you have had leaderless movement in the sense that you no longer have those charismatic leaders and all that of the movements, no longer have the vanguard party leading the movement or whatever. It is different. And one of the most interesting experiences I have had the privilege, I would say, to witness is in Sudan, where I saw that the youth, the young people had created a grassroots horizontal organization using the Facebook and all these social media things to coordinate, and very allergic against even any form of centralization. They coordinate, they are very efficient, but they don't even want to create some kind of body called Central Committee or whatever committee, whatever name it has, even coordination in that sense. So they coordinate through the social media without creating a body called, you know, this. So all this is to be taken into account. And I would say in the kind of statements, any attempt to reach the young generation, the new generation, should beware of repeating the kind of literature of the past. You know, to start a text with a quotation by Leon Trotsky is disastrous. Is the best way to repel a lot of potential readers. They will stop at this, because that would look religious. So we have, I think, to take into account the fact that there is the real need for renewal. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. Okay, so we've got about half an hour for discussion, thanks to our three speakers, because of what we had to fit in with this session. We will curtail the break so that we start our next session on time. So as I said before, if comrades want to speak, whether it's to ask a question or make a comment, you can have up to 3 minutes, and please raise your hands in the chat, and I'll try and balance people. Okay, so I've got Rowan and then Dave, and of course people don't have to take 3 minutes, so over to you, Rowan.
Thank you. Apologies, everyone, for...
Sorry, Rowan, you need to turn yourself up.
Oh, absolutely. Is that better?
Yeah.
Better? Good, good. Apologies, everyone. I'm having all kinds of technical issues, including microphone and internet issues. Really interesting talk from Gilbert and Anna, highlighting the scale of the crisis. And I think it picks up well on themes that we established with, and unfortunately I came sort of into the earlier discussion halfway through. I'm really interested in the talk about the origins of this mass far right movement and sort of tracing it back to 2015 in the United States to the Tea Party context. And I think that's all very true. But I also think that I mean, of course, there's always antecedents of antecedents of antecedents, but I think that it's really interesting to see that the role that the internet played in the early noughties of the formation of a lot of this leading up to 2008, but very much crystallizing in that financial crisis. And I remember being on communities in YouTube in the early noughties and seeing just how incredibly toxic and reactionary views were becoming in online spaces. And there's a vacuum of theory here, which to connect to the idea that we need more theory about why the internet is especially conducive to these things above and beyond the mere social circumstances that surrounds the internet. And I think that has a lot to do with the architecture of the internet itself, but how that architecture has been shaped by capitalist forces that have created it and molded it for their purposes, often rentier purposes, not some kind of conspiratorial thing, but the way that the internet plays into extremism, I think, is actually tied to the way that the internet is designed as an advertising platform. And there's a lot to talk about here, so I won't sort of go at length, but I think it's a really important area to look at the emergence of this from the online spaces, because I think that isn't going away anytime soon, and I think it's actually going to continue to play left, and our attempts to organize, which is going to have to be through online spaces. Thank you.
Thanks, Rowan. I'll take Dave and then Jamie and then Mike.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, I agree with what Rowan just said about the importance of a left intervention around the internet. Absolutely crucial. What I wanted to raise is another question, which, although I agree overall with the document and Phil and the other speakers' interventions, I think we do have to consider the possibility that there might be governments that are Keynesian and have a Keynesian type approach following the COVID pandemic, and what you might call the center. There could be a reawakening of the center in certain countries and certain places. Now, this won't be a solution, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing against the overall framework we're operating in, but I do think we should include the possibilities that you could have, for instance, in England, a Starmer type government, which won't be a Corbyn government, but will maybe have reflationary anti-austerity aspects to it, yeah? And therefore, for the left, for us, we have to relate to that in the correct fashion. If we just assume that everything is going to go, either to the far right or will it be a revolutionary explosion, we have got problems. We have to understand there are variations, there are possibilities in different countries. That's very, very important. Another point I want to make is I think it's very important that we, as a tendency, are very clear that we're opposed to all the campist type of approaches on the revolutionary left at the moment. And what do I mean by campism? It means reduce all struggles to a struggle against American imperialism. Therefore, we hold back on criticizing the Putin government over the atrocious repression of Navalny and his supporters. Even though Navalny is not a left-wing person, you have to defend his right to organize. You have to defend his right to free speech. Similarly with the Uyghurs in China. It's incredible to see on Facebook and elsewhere, comrades who are, I'd say, part of the left, if you like, coming out and refusing to support the freedom of these people because they have this campist approach. They say it's all to do with the CIA and the American imperialists manipulating the situation to their advantage. So against campism, let's also take into account the possibility of if you like, a revival of the centre in a temporary and a weak way, but a possibility.
Thanks, Dave. Jamie, if you got back in. No, Jamie was.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Sorry, I joined the meeting on two separate things. I was going to walk around the house. Happy Saturday, everyone, and I hope you're having a lovely week. So I'm really interested in talking about the point that a fellow person made about the lines we need to organise and the youth. I think a critical part of left organising that has been missed out is, well, first of all, when we talk about the old times and we talk about the working of trade union lines and traditional forms of building solidarity, I think that in this brave new world, which you could call these days, the lines are very different, and I don't see us making a movement of mass support through the trade union movement. I identify areas such as the dance music movement or other areas of traditional genres like rock or punk. Sorry, one second. But what I'm really interested in getting at is this concept of a revolutionary dance movement, which would look at, so for those of you who don't know, dance music came out of the second summer of love, which was in 1988-89. It was like the first summer of love, it was a time of countercultural change, and it created pressures inside society that either would have revolutionized society, or as a result of the status quo not wanting to change, it got absorbed by the status quo, which has left us with the dance music scene we see today. But I think it's very critical that we go back and look at and go back to the values and ideas where it came from, and look at how we can use the net of dance music and the arts culture. By net, I mean like the fishing net, being the wideness of the net is huge. It crosses all cultural lines. And I really, really think that when we look at the organising the youth, it needs to be through non-traditional, outside the box means. And I think looking at through the lens of dance music, you could really build up a movement of sufficient support from the catch you're able to bring in. And I've been developing this format for a dance rave that would look at getting people, the format would be, how do you get people aware about the ideas of the night? The second part would be, how can you produce content to support the series that would get the public consciousness and public conversation in the industry about the idea? And the third critical one, which we'll be keen to talk about tomorrow, is how can we develop clear and accessible and efficient avenues to get people active through? Being at parties, people can say, oh, I'm really interested in getting involved in climate change, but how can we have defined avenues that are efficient and quick and easy to get into to get them involved? Because time is of the essence. We've got 3 years to the next election, and all I can think about is how we can build a movement outside of politics to force positive and lasting change in society. I think a big part of it can be done through dance, and furthermore, other genres such as rock, punk, and jazz, And that's all I had to say, and thank you. And I hope you all heard me all right. And I look forward to tomorrow.
Thanks very much, Jamie. Mike?
The phenomena behind 73 million people voting for Donald Trump is very interesting and significant, but the most significant factor coming out of the American election is that Trump lost, and that on Biden's first day in office, he signed the agreement to re-enter the Paris Climate Accords and to commit to going to COP26 in Glasgow in November of this year. And I think that's a key focus that revolutionaries in Britain need to establish and work on over the coming period, because it's fairly clear that since the Paris Agreement of 2015, there has not been the sort of change that is necessary, and the need for mass pressure on a global scale on leaders of governments across the world is becoming even more significant, and it is becoming an issue of survival or death. So as we approach the COP, I think it will be very important that, particularly because one of the unexpected consequences of the COVID crisis, or the consequences of the unexpected COVID crisis, is the grounding of global aviation, that the nature of the COP protest itself will fundamentally change. And whereas in previous COPs we've seen hundreds of thousands of people descend on cities across the world and challenge governments in those cities, that's clearly not going to happen by this November. And therefore, the possibility of a decentralized global movement across countries of the world focusing on demands on the COP, but taking place within their own countries becomes a possibility. And we've seen the way in which the climate strike, the school climate strikes and so on have captured the imagination of people. And I think such a process is going to continue. And the fact that it is the UK government that is hosting the COP and it's taking place in Scotland, probably at a time in which the independence movement will be reaching its peak, makes that process doubly important for eco-socialists across the world. And so I do hope that we can all get involved in that process, which will in particular take its next stage in March with the From the Ground Up to digital event to mobilize and support that process.
Thanks, Mike. Nadia, and then Mark, and then me.
Hello. Thank you to all the speakers. So I have two questions. One is like general and direct, and it's to all speakers. So I question like how potentially would be the mechanisms or the strategies to organize labor in this increasing informal structure, informal sector that we are, realizing, under this neoliberal epoch, let's say. The other one is more directly to Dr. Gilbert. And it's actually like somehow when you were claiming that radicalization is more among the young sector, the young age. So to me, somehow this such a generalization, even if one can like substantiate it with historical uprisings or insurgencies. But I think like such a generalization needs to be somehow be revisited, because once one adds the class analysis variable, one might claim that such a claim might be true when it comes to middle class protests, because it might depend more on increasing the consciousness of the people and the education of the people. But I think when it comes to the poor class, to the like those that you call the precarious, I think age doesn't play a variable anymore, because what is at stake is their survival, their basic needs. So I think like when it comes to these, to these poor masses, I don't think like age would play a determining factor. And we can see this historic revolt that we are witnessing now in India. So we see the old and the young together in the streets. So what do you think of that? Thank you.
Thank you. Mark.
Is it Mark Finley, Terry?
I'm trying to unmute myself. Sorry, I've just managed to do that now. In general, I'm completely in favour. It's basically an answer to Jamie Anker's point about rave culture and so on. In general, I'm completely in favour of being involved with cultural activities, as many of you will know. However, we need to be aware of that some of these aren't necessarily radical in the way that we would wish. And some of them also, I think a lot of these could be involved with sort of anti-science and sort of quotes alternative anti-lockdown activities, which are actually potentially quite dangerous. I'm not really sure about what the rave culture is, and it's been spoken of here, but I think what we do need to be able to connect to is cultural movements that come from the, obviously from the British sort of the black people's things like reggae and more. Reggae is probably a very old one, but I mean, some of these have very radical content, and we need to be able to connect to those. But I think we need to be very cautious about how we pick particular things, because they could lead us onto something that we don't necessarily be in favour of. Ended. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to say a couple of things about comments that I think all the speakers made about the nature of the attack on women in the first pandemic that Phil talks about, the COVID pandemic, but also about women's resistance, because it seems to me that it is important, first of all, to recognize that what's been happening to women during the pandemic is both a revelation and a deepening of the oppression that we faced in the pre-pandemic situation. Slogans such as stay home to be safe don't take into account the amount of violence that exists in many people's homes, the imposition of home working on a whole layer of people who are able to work from home in the pandemic has meant that women's burden in social reproduction has been massively increased. Phil's right to say that for some women that's resulted in them being forced out of the labour market, but for other women it's just been a further burden. And we can see from the stats that although the amount of work in the home that men have done has gone up marginally, it's gone up far more times for women. At the same time, I think it's important to recognise, Phil mentioned the victory on abortion in Argentina and also the situation in Poland. I don't know if comrades have seen that on Wednesday night, the Polish government finally published the law that they were unable to publish in November because of the strength of the protests on the streets and in the squares of every Polish city. Those mobilizations have started again. We need to be ready to be involved in solidarity action in this country. But I think we should also note the huge role of women in other mobilizations. For example, the mobilization that changed the Chilean constitution and threw out that imposed by Pinochet was a movement led by women. So it's not only women organising amongst about our own demands, but leading broader social movements. And I think that is a deepening of a process that we've seen before, but an extension of it, which we should celebrate. And finally, a very specific question to Cristina. There was a very horrible incident that happened in Brazil on Tuesday, Wednesday, and if you could speak about that and whether it would be appropriate to send a message of solidarity to the comrade who was attacked, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Jude.
Thanks, Terry. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to the speakers. This has been such an interesting session and such an exciting opportunity to hear about some of the ways that people are engaging with these issues and theorizing these kinds of questions in different ways from different perspectives and in different parts of the world. I just want to speak a little to the points made by Jamie and Nadia about interacting with different movements and different groups of people that are already in existence, because it seems to me like this is the strength of an organization like ACR, is that we can engage with that kind of pluralism that says, okay, so beyond the kind of broad anti-capitalist approach that we are all taking, there is no obligation, there's no requirement that we all hold precisely the same views or expectations or opinions about what ought to be the case. but rather to say we recognize the solidarity of mutual struggles, and therefore the wide, huge variety and diversity of movements that are already in progress are things in which we can be involved. And so finding ways of connecting to already existing groups, already existing movements, and really meeting people where they are, rather than expecting people to come to where we are in order to make a difference, seems to me to be the only way, really, that we can respond to the extraordinary circumstances and oppressions that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jude. I've got Paul Crofts, who for some bizarre reason doesn't seem to have a hand he can put up. So I'll take Paul next. If anybody else wants to speak, let me know either by raising your hand or messaging me while Paul's speaking. Otherwise, I'll bring the speakers back in reverse order. Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I just wanted to raise the issue more centrally. It's been referred to, but I would like to make it more central about the whole issue of racism in the rise of the far right. To my mind, it goes back not to the last 5-10 years, but the use of racism, anti-refugee, anti-immigrant feeling goes back to the 1970s and 80s. And the twists and turns of the way our immigration in the UK, the twists and turns of immigration policy, which is always tightening. There's never been, as far as I'm concerned, any significant loosening of immigration controls, but rather year on year, governments, both Labour and Conservative, have tightened immigration controls against both the families and of existing migrants, immigrants, but also against refugees, the use of the hostile environment in recent years. All this has fueled and contributed towards the rise of the far right. And of course, that's interlinked with the refugee crisis that's also been referred to, largely caused by wars and interventions from the US and Britain and others, particularly in the Middle East, in Iraq and what have you. And that kind of acts as a feedback, a constant feedback loop that's then combined with the austerity neoliberal policies that have been pursued since Thatcher and also were pursued by under Blair, which decimated working class communities in terms of industries. So again, you've added in another feedback loop, which fuels racism. And I think that the left needs to see the fight against racism and racist views and a kind of social democratic kind of nationalism, the racist nationalism, which is now being generated, as central to our political strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I haven't got anybody else indicating to speak. So I'll ask Gilbert to come back first for 3 or 4 minutes, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Okay. No, I mean, very quickly on the women, the role of women in the struggles. I think that the most important to note is not the Polish case, where it is an attack on women, and women are responding to the attack on women. So it's on a specific women issue. But what is more striking is the prominent role of women in various struggles of a general character. The prominent role of women in the Sudan revolution. There was a mention of the role of women in the Lebanese uprising of last year. Think of Belarus, for instance, where I mean, this is a country no one mentioned, but you had a massive movement in Sweden, and the key leading figures were women. I mean, that is much more striking and actually important in the significance of in the in the deep social meaning of it, then of course fight back on issues like abortion or the rest, as in Poland, which is of course very important. It's not to belittle it, but just to say that it is the other that is more the novelty in what we have. On the issues raised by Nadia, thank you for this. I mean, yes, the informal, if you mean it in the sociological sense or the economic sense, the informal sector, which is absolutely massive in the global south, yeah, the organization of the informal sector has always been a key problem for social struggles. But that's here where we see that this old kind of conception of the factory-based cell organization, all that. Well, this is very much Petrograd or maybe parts of industrialized Europe in the 20th century. But this is not exactly the kind of organization that we see now. I mentioned Sudan, for instance, where it is on the basis of neighborhood committees of these young people. And that's where you have all the informal, the unemployed. The unemployed are massive number and all that organizing. And here I'm speaking not of a few hundred or even few thousand. We're speaking of an absolutely massive organization. So that's very, very important. About the youth, no, I mean, of course, when you have a category like the farmers in India that is attacked, you will have all the farmers, whatever their age. Yeah, you're right on that. But if you look at the uprisings that we have, Hong Kong, Chile, the Arab countries, the United States, Black Lives Matter, and all that, it is overwhelmingly young people, and that's normal, and that's absolutely how it is. And of course, the precarious, the unemployed, and all that are their proportion among the young is higher than the rest of the population. And that's a further cause, a further reason for their radicalization. And I'll end by pointing to the fact that the reaction to precarization can be different also depending to age. In older age, it might go to the right. And that's why actually you see all these, the polls showing that the older are more to the right, the younger are more to the left. And we should be happy that it's not the contrary, because that's the best sign we could have for the future.
Thank you, Gilbert. And Cristina.
I strongly agree with the Achcar analysis. I think we see in Latin America, for instance, the main role in the struggles are from the young girls, 20, 30 years old. And in Brazil, for instance, young Black girls, they are they conduct everything against Bolsonaro, against solidarity initiatives, and from the COVID, everything. It doesn't mean that the old guys, just like us, were not fighting, struggling, but they are the leaders, and it's good. It's very important for us. It's very important for us we had, through the PSOL in Brazil, we had the opportunity to know a group of Democratic Socialists of America young leaders. They are very, very young. All these phenomena around the socialists in the Democratic Party or out of the Democratic Party in the United States are almost kids. They are almost kids. It's impressive. And it's good for that's the meaning, that's the reason for the radicalization Achcar expressed. I like very much the comparison. Of course, it's different in many ways. The comparison with the uprising from the 60s in the 19th century, because it's very have a lot of coincidence. It doesn't mean that we in Brazil had an uprising of the guys that deliver, I don't know the name in English, the guys that deliver food in iFood, Happy, Uber Eats. These guys are almost 9% are guys from 19 years old to 30. It's a new kind of youth, a worker class making in its making. You know? And well, I think it's of course, it's not a completely generalized phenomenon. It's not we have exceptions, of course, but that's the trend of around the question made by Terry. We had an attack last week, 2 or 3 days ago, against a co-consular of the PSOL in São Paulo, in my city. And she's a Black trans activist. It's the most vulnerable sector in the world. And the far right here, Bolsonaristas, the far right, the Brazilian far right, loves to attack this kind of people. They are all our representatives in city councils and representative chambers, all are under threats of death. The situation is very, very serious for us. All the young and mostly Black and trans activists. You can imagine the hate of this far right for all very young. But Carol is okay, and we are fighting to defend all our companions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Cristina. I just put a link to an article that gives you a bit more information about the attack. Bill.
Okay. Well, a very interesting discussion, very rich discussion, and I can't comment on it all, but I'm just going to say a few things. First of all, I was very interested in the things said by Ana Cristina about militarism and militarized accumulation and the role of the military in production and the role of the military and militarized production and accumulation today. A lot of this has been explained in some detail in the book by William I. Robinson called Global Police State. And I think better than, as far as I know, by anybody else. He's in the lead on that. And it's a very significant thing for the role of the military sector in government and in power. And it reaches right down into the police organizations as well as the military organizations, and the huge role that military companies play in contemporary capitalism, including the deep integration of the IT sector in military production, including, for example, Facebook, which has massive contracts with the US military. I'm going to put a link to William I. Robinson's book, The Global Police State. Oh, yeah, in the chat. I wanted also to take up the question of the danger, of course, although we don't want to take a campist position. Dave Kellaway was absolutely right on that. In defense of China, it's some kind of Maoism or something like that. Absurd. But nonetheless, there is a real danger at some point down the line of a military clash between the United States and China, which is a real danger and which we have to campaign against. Look, I was also, I appreciated very much the contribution made by Paul Croft towards the end there, because he explained the interaction in a very good way, the dialectic of the interaction between racism, the refugee crisis, especially with people from Syria, and the way that that is used, that is the key mobilizing thing for the far right, obviously, and the rise of racism and nationalism, which we experience in this country through Brexit, although a large part of the left didn't understand that. And that is a key thing for us to fight in the next period. And I would say, in a general sense, I know it sounds a bit liberal, but you know, I pose it as the defense of multiculturalism, against ethnic nationalism and xenophobia. Okay. Yeah, look, there was a very interesting discussion about organization and different milieu and the way we can reach out to them and so on, by Jamie and, is it Nadia? Or was it Nadine? Is it Nadine or Nadia?
Nadia.
Nadia, yeah, Nadia was right. Okay, Nadia's right, because if you're working in a union like NUPE, yeah, you'll often get involved in struggles in which lots of older people participate with, you know, trade union militancy. The real question, though, is where can we find the people who are really radical and anti-system, not just militants at the level of the trade unions? And, you know, without a shadow of a doubt, well, Gilbert and Cristina and other comrades have explained it, Terry, as well, about the role of youth and of women and of young women in struggles globally, and how we reach out to those people is very important. I was very interested in the contribution made by Jamie in that respect. We need to discuss it, and we need to discuss all the ways in which we can use culture, alternative culture, revolutionary culture. I don't know, I can't remember who it was who said that sometimes reactionary forces can intervene in this culture as well. Well, if we don't, reactionary forces as well. We saw at the time of punk, the mobilization of punks, some punks, so-called punk groups around fascist ideas. But I was also very struck by the contribution from Jude and about how revolutionaries should, we can't impose, you know, a tight framework. Now we have the Revolutionary Party, linked to the Revolutionary Party, we have the rank and file movement, you know, like front organizations based on the factories, whatever. That's completely out now. We can't do that. And the sensibility towards the distrust for authoritarianism and authoritarian forms of organizations, which Gilbert explained, was very to the point, I thought. You know, the next word that's coming is going to be but. However, within an organisation which can reach out to all kinds of cultural groups, in which there's a diversity of activity towards the youth in a non-democratic centralism, non-hierarchical way, we need a focus for political discussion, theoretical elaboration, and strategic elaboration, which only a revolutionary organisation, a mass or a militant socialist organisation can provide, and that's what we're attempting to do with the ACR. That's it.
Thanks, Phil. A couple of people appear to have put their hands up, but this is the end of this session. We'll take a break now and come back at as close to 2:30 as we can manage it, so we can start the next session relatively on time and finish on time.
It'll be 3 o'clock, Terry.
Sorry?
It'll be 3 o'clock. It's 2:45 now.
Oh, so I beg your pardon. My yes, 3 o'clock. Brain.
Thank you.
A time machine that I could turn it back.
Thank you for your wonderful chairing, Terry. It's much appreciated.
Well, thank you everybody for your participation. I thought it was a really excellent session, and particularly thank you to Ana Cristina for coming all the way from Brazil to join us. We really appreciate it. Take care, comrades. Have a good cup of tea or whatever you're going to do. And obviously, if Ana Cristina wants to stay for the next session, she's very welcome. You don't have to go back.
Hello, Simon, are you there?
I am here, Joseph. Are you okay? Haven't seen Michael or Seema yet, so we're just going to chase those up, both of those up.
Okay.
Seema's just joined, so we have Seema now, which is good.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Seema. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hello,
Seema. Hi, Joseph. I'm just trying to figure out. Oh, there we go.
Obviously, you'll know everybody very well on the platform with you today.
Joseph, if you're okay, just doing a reminder for everyone that we are recording the session and also live streaming it. I've paused it for the moment, so if anyone's joined just for this session, just need to make them sure they're all aware.